I'm Matt Martelli. This is the Off-Road Racer Podcast, and I'm here with my new friend, Dan Roush. What's up, man?
Hey, thanks for having me, and I appreciate it very much. What a real treat. Thanks for the tour this morning. Neat to see what you guys are doing. It's exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny because you sent me an email, and it was titled, your story about your experience in racing in Baja, a little ditty in Baja, and I'm like, what is this, right? And then I read it, and I was like, this is a fantastic, first person, narrative of like, this is what it's like. And especially for somebody who didn't grow up in this culture, who just decided, hey man, this looks cool. I want to do it. And, and especially doing it on a bike. So I'm super excited to share your story with everybody, because I think there's a lot of people out there who can relate. They're like, they didn't grow up rich. They didn't grow up, within off-road racing, proximate to Southern California, all the things that normally people in this culture come from. You're kind of a nobody. And I thought that was what made the cool.
Well, thank you.
Well, that's what makes the story cool. And it's also, I think, an important tenet to off-road culture of like, you don't have to be somebody special to come and do this. You just have to accept the challenge.
Yeah, it's the eloquence of it. I'm the everyday man.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that was watching Wide World of Sports and years later thought, hey, you know what? I can do that, I think. So let me research it and let me understand. And the bar for entry was surprisingly low. And the more research I did, I realized that, we're sharing essentially the same route, the same course with the heroes of the sport. And as I looked, trying to find, are there qualifying series? Do you have to work your way up? And the ladder philosophy. And really, I realized, this is a little bit like if you take your tennis shoes and your ball and you want to play pickup ball with Michael Jordan, you can. And I was just flabbergasted by it. And I thought, well, I think that's for me. So I called some buddies and we decided to give it a shot and got into the sport and had some success and had a few challenges along the way. But really for me, not getting anywhere near reaching the pinnacle of many of the heroes and many of the guests that you've had on the show here with, the Johnny Campbells and the Larry Rosslers of the world.
Right.
But I think maybe my guess would be for your listenership, I probably represent much more about what that demographic looks like. But more importantly, maybe the message is how you translate racing and how you translate into involvement into the culture, into success into other areas of your life and failures, stub toes.
Sure.
So, years ago when I went through my little experience, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, Sal Fish had called and said, hey, listen, you ought to share this at some point, so make me a promise you will. So this is kind of a culmination of many years of getting the point where sharing that story. And along the way, Casey, the late, great Casey Folks, caught wind of that, and he said the same thing. He said, yeah, you got to share this with people because this is the everyday guy. And something bad that happened, that something really, really good came out of it. So that's kind of the genesis of it.
Well, let's get into it. I mean, how did it start? You'd already begun riding motorcycles, right? And you were just looking at, hey, this is possibly something I want to do. And you started playing. How did you figure it all out and put it together?
You bet. Yeah. Early, when I was younger, 5, 6 years old, my pop, a separate story, but an extraordinary man. He took a Wonder Bread truck and gutted it and turned it into a motorhome. And we would go to San Carlos and go fishing. And we did that for many years into my youth, and then got into life, education, career, and but had always ridden motorcycles along the way. And then started a family, had 4 sons. That was our common bonding thing, camping, riding motorcycles up in California City. Decided to give District 37 a try, so ran some races out there and did a bunch of the lower, maybe organizations short of SCORE and organizations around the Met. And I just at one point thought, I can just do Baja. How hard can it be? Hard, as it turns out.
Right.
And on a Tuesday afternoon, I was calling to see if I could register to make it in for that weekend's race at the San Felipe 250, and went in radically unprepared, which is one of the first lessons in all of this, was do your homework, be prepared. So my then wife had a brand new Chevy Suburban, and it just seemed like the perfect pre-run vehicle. So it was bone stock, and we took it down to San Felipe and attacked the whoops. And that was on a Thursday evening. We drove in. Friday we were pre-running, and then on Saturday we were racing.
That's crazy. Well, you wrote a very eloquent story about your experience. Talk a little bit about what that was like.
So after the incident occurred, saw Fish in a extension of Gracious, and this one I was in the hospital after the accident. He called and said, it's important that you share this. It's unique, even within the world of off-road. It's unique, and not unique in an ultra high competitive standpoint, but unique to something that could happen to anybody, and how to avoid some of those mistakes. But moreover, the low entry and how you can get started. And if you have a dream, a little bit of money, dedicated group of friends, and a little bit of delusion, that you can go and have an extraordinary life experience. And I think that that's probably true. It doesn't necessarily have to be in Baja, but of course it holds something special that all of us have a difficult time articulating, but certainly exist. So, we registered for the race, and we went down there, and we pre-ran my poor wife's Suburban, and we made it through 80 miles of the San Felipe whoops. And I don't know if the Suburban was more beat up or if we were, but we were done for the day. And I had done enough research and realized it was really important to pre-run and understand the course. But really my understanding was it was about not making the wrong turns and where to go fast and where to slow down.
Was that your first time in San Felipe?
It was.
Yeah.
First time there.
It's like Mars. Like when you get there and you've never been there, like people are just shocked. And the other thing too that's interesting about it is because there's not big trees because it's desert. A lot of people get spun out on their sense of direction, right? They look around and they're like, wait, what way is north, south? I mean, even though they could see the sun and all that kind of stuff, it's really, it's a really stark environment, and it's very, confusing for people to come down there and figure it out.
So very true. And had a very good mentor in that world later as we got more serious about racing. And Mike Kornwinder, you may recognize his name. He went on to race the Baja 1000 solo and won.
Nice.
And so he was really good. He recognized strengths and weaknesses of our group. Mine is I have a horrific sense of direction, and essentially said, look, there's kind of a mountain range in the middle, and if you go too far in one direction, you'll run into water, and too far in the other direction, you'll run into water. So it can't be that bad. But food and water in between is important, so keep that in mind. But that is so true. When you get really kind of ripping along in that part of the country, it's really easy to get disoriented and lost. And of course, so this was mid 2000s, and technology was different. Course marking was different.
Yep.
The scoring was different.
Didn't have tracking.
Communications was different. Everything was different. Kind of charming, actually, right? There was it added to the element of adventure.
Totally.
And I think it called on a different skill set outside of maybe what is necessary to perform at a high level today. But for a common man, very doable. And those details are probably the things that, it's kind of like a plane crash. If you've done much reading about what causes a plane crash, it's very rarely one thing. It's a number of things. Yeah, sequence of things. Yep, cascading logic that at some point went the wrong direction. And that's probably ultimately what happened to me. So, direction and where I was at and time and water and fuel planning and pit stops and all that were marginal at best. But man, I was having a great time. It was so much fun. It was the adventure of a lifetime and everything that I had hoped for, including the pre-run and race day and contingency and just all of it.
Well, walk us through your race experience.
Okay, so the pre-run was interesting in that, you know, we certainly found the limits of our pre-run vehicle, and our chase team, it consisted of the pre-run vehicle and 3 buddies. A lifelong friend in American. I have 4 friends named Brian, so we have American Brian, Canadian Brian, we have OB, the original Brian, and we have NB, the new Brian.
Nice.
So American Brian was down there, and he had quite a bit of experience in Mexico, so helped with some of the language barrier, some of the cultural issues, so that was nice to have. His friend was with us, and he had very little exposure to Mexico and Baja, and you recognize it. You've exposed it enough to people that they kind of at first can be a little bit overwhelming.
Sure.
I mean, everything from the driving and the traffic laws are more about suggestions, and there's a different rhythm to driving, and so we're trying to wrap our mind all around that, and so we made it through the pre-run, and a couple really odd things happened. I had an intrinsic, a very deep-rooted, uneasy feeling, and when you're doing things that kind of take you outside your comfort zone, you know that's going to happen. You're going to feel a little bit off, and we call it fear, so you just ignore it. And particularly as a man, right? You just turn that off and think, don't be a baby about this. But it was deeper. There was something about it that was just telling me, you know, when you get down there and you see it all, it just felt like maybe we're in over our heads, but why let that stop you?
Right.
So
you're in at this point.
You're in it. You paid your entry fee. You went out and you bought the bike and you bought the gear and you got your friends to volunteer and you're in it. So we put together basically a pit plan, and we started talking to folks and asking, what do we need to do to be successful at this? And our definition of success was just finish. Right. Just finishing. But my plan was I was going to race the season and try to get a season championship in the sportsman class. So, right, something humble. 2 weeks earlier, as I was preparing physically and getting the bike set up for the race, I was riding California City, and I had a head-on collision with a guy coming that direction. Ironically enough, practicing for the same race, and we just kind of clipped each other. But I broke my kneecap, and it caused some problems with swelling. But the doctor said, "Hey, it's just going to hurt. Not going to be any further damage. Tape it up, keep riding." So part of my strategy on race day was in the rough stuff, I'll slow down, which San Felipe
can't do that.
That's just right.
No, look, there's so much treacherous stuff about Baja, but one of the things in San Felipe is the sand, right? And the way that the sand works with the whoops is that the top of the whoop is hard packed, right? That's why it formed that way. The bottom of the whoop is soft, and it can be, a foot and a half of sand at the bottom of some of those whoops, right? So if you're on a bike, a 2-wheel vehicle, slowing down in those whoops is not good. It's going to cause you to, basically cross up your front wheel and
start swapping. And, yep. And the bonus is in the bottom of that, you might have a rock or loose rocks or an embedded rock
or choyas or, you know what I mean? Like there's so much stuff down there. It's funny because, we were talking earlier and growing up, in San Diego since I was 12 years old. This is like the mid 80s. I've had this long love affair with Baja, and good and bad. And it's like dating a hot chick who can beat your ass, right? So you got to be okay that, you might, get punched here and there, and that's part of the deal, right? And in Baja, and in particular in San Felipe, because San Felipe, it is a hostile environment in terms of, the flora and the fauna and the variety of cacti. There's nothing like soft and nice.
No, no, heat, if there's one good thing, it's relatively easy to chase when things are going right with a little bit of a figure 8 configuration oftentimes. But other than that, that's about it.
Yeah.
Everything else is very difficult.
It is, but until you run to the backside of the course, because then the backside of the course is really only accessible by one crossroad, right? Otherwise, you're going to have to off road in.
Yep.
And usually that's where the problems occur.
That's right. Yep. So I had went out the day before when I realized I haven't pre-run, and I kept talking to more people. You gotta pre-run. It's much about the obstacles, and at that time we were using essentially road books and maps, so GPS wasn't a thing, and you don't want to miss a turn, you'll head in the wrong direction. So I went out and I put about 60 miles in, and I just remember thinking that night, oof, this is a problem. I expected whoops, but I didn't expect 100 miles of whoops. And, but again, you're in it. Hey, just suck it up, buttercup, and just go do it and get it done. So when I was coming back that night during the pre-running, I was coming back through the landfill, and, back behind a tree, a couple big, black birds flew out in front of me, and I clipped them going pretty fast, hit the top of my head. And I just remember thinking, okay, things happen. This is Baja. But it's kind of an omen. I really started having this ominous feeling. But again, just set it aside. Don't be a wussy, and show up for the race. So that's what we did. And we took off the next day. And once you started, those nerves went away. And, mistake number 2, it was a XR 650. It had right back when that was the day, because, if Johnny and the team race them, then that's going to make all of us faster. And that's 100%. What you ride, right? The big red pig. And, it was bone stock suspension. I maybe had, heavy duty tubes in it, but bone stock tires, and
that's crazy.
And I thought, well, I'll just crank down the preload a little bit and it'll be fine.
And you're going into what essentially is the roughest race of the season, right?
Because that's where you would take stock suspension, right?
And that's where stock suspension goes to die.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So I took it, and you knew you had stock suspension, but in sportsman class, we weren't doing too bad. So made it to the first pit stop, and my brother, hey, how's your knee feeling up? And he was jonesing to get on the bike, and he said, you're probably let me take a stint. I said, no, I really want to do this solo. And so kept going. And worked hard on, I had done other adventure athletics, so I knew about hydration and, take care of yourself. So things were actually going pretty well. Had hit a couple hidden rocks under the sand that's common to that type of the world, and had some smiles in the rims, and it was getting a little beat up, but had one little bobble, ended up in a bush, and it took me 15 minutes to drag the bike out of the bush, but really nothing too terribly bad. But then we reached the halfway point, and give or take, and it was about noon, and I didn't know a lot about that part of the country in particular, about the hidden rocks underneath the sand and the lack of rocks casting shadows.
Yeah.
And my theory is in the rough stuff, go slow, but in the high speed stuff, hey, that's where you can just get in a tuck and haul ass and catch back up, because you're still, even though it's sportsmen and you're still racing, right? There's the thrill of racing.
There's this kind of ominous pressure on you the entire time to let go, and it's hard to let that not affect you.
It's very astute. It's and everybody feels it. Yeah. And you can, particularly race day, it's palatable. You can see it. It's on everybody's face.
Yeah.
So it was there, but I was running probably top thirds class and thinking this is okay. All right. I'm doing okay. So just keep on keeping on doing what you're doing, and maybe get to the last 60, 70 miles and see how you're doing. And now you start having thoughts that maybe aren't rational. Maybe I'll take a top third, right? Maybe I'll make a run at this.
Sure.
And so we kept going, and we had run down that year the direction the course was going. We had run down Portecitos Road, and by the power plant, hung a right up, ran along the ridgeline, dropped down to the wash, and we hadn't pre-run any of that section, but it was the worst.
Which is bad because, there's a series of washes that you're talking about that go from bad to worse to even worse, right? In terms of,
very true,
challenge, right? And they're beautiful. That's the other part is like you're surrounded by beauty. So you have this tendency to like start looking around at like, wow, isn't this beautiful? And then bam.
Yeah, just when you lose attention and start to enjoy the grandeur, that's what it gets you.
Yeah.
So I got in a tuck and I was just going along a long right hand sweeper, and we probably like to think we're going faster than we would, but it was probably a defendable, honest 50, 60 miles an hour around that corner, and I remember seeing the rock, and it maybe stuck up maybe 5-6 inches. I was sitting down, so problem number 2, stock suspension, should have been standing up. Problem number 3, had not pre-run the section, so that a cascading logic of airplane failure. And it happened really fast, but equally slow. And I hit the rock, and I remember the impact when I was sitting. I remember it hitting my back, and I had fractured vertebrae in my back prior to that, so I kind of knew what that felt like. And you're assessing a lot in a short period of time. And I came up and I was drifting off the bike, and a couple thoughts went through my mind. Oof, that hurt. This might be bad. But I also remember the handlebars being yanked out of my hand, but I was slowly drifting away from the bike. So there's a lot I don't remember, but I remember it being a kicker. So I think the front suspension probably took most of it, but the back with the preload, wrong valving, stock, it kicked pretty good. And I remember floating away and reaching for the handlebars. A very vivid thought. I can remember reaching for the handlebars and thinking, I think I got this. I think I'm going to grab the bars, and I might, be a flying W, but I'm going to land back on the bike and close call, and everything's going to be fine. And then I remember nothing visual, but I remember audio. I remember the sound of sand and motorcycle revving, and I remember steel, and it's just a very real,
visceral
theory. Yeah, very, very much so. And the visceral nature of that sticks in my mind. And then I remember silence. And I was laying on my side, and when I came to, I could see the bike quite a ways away. And that in and of itself, I'd wrecked before, but I thought this one's a pretty good one. And a couple things concerned me. One, nothing hurt, right? There just wasn't any pain. And the second thing is, I was wearing a Camelback with the bite valve and all my gear. And I remember between the bike and I remember the bite valve had come off of the Camelback, and I remember watching my water run out and thinking that's problematic, right? You're going to need water out here. And then I remember having a second thought and thinking, when we came down to that wash, I'm not so sure I stayed on course. And you know how there's a lot of little offshoots through there?
Ton.
I think maybe I had taken an offshoot, and the alternate line, maybe it wasn't the best alternate line, and laying there and thinking, okay, I just kind of got to assess and check the right leg, the left leg. You go through the self-assessment. And I'd done all that. And then the pain just slowly started creeping in, and I realized I think I might be in trouble here because I'm having problems moving, and then lost consciousness again, kind of.
And what body position are you in at this point?
Fetal. Yeah, laying on my side. I'm not sure I was sucking my thumb, but I felt like I probably should have been. So in a fetal position on my side, looking at the bike, the ridge is to my back, the open wash to the left. There's a mountain range. And I don't know how long I laid there, but I kind of remember coming in and out of it a couple times. And then I remember...
But you had a helmet on, so you only have you have a narrow area.
Limited field of vision.
Yeah.
Yep, limited field of vision. And then I remember panic setting in because there was something missing, and then I recognize it's breathing. I'm not breathing, so gonna have to figure this out. And I work through it, and we've all knocked our breath out. And you know how panicky that could be, but this was different. There was something really, really, really bad about this. And I thought, okay, calm down, continue the assessment, and it'll come. When you knock your breath out of yourself, it'll come. And it just wasn't coming. And struggled with that for a little bit. And then I got to a point where I started to get lightheaded, and I wasn't sure from the bump on the head or if it was from not breathing. And I kind of felt like it started to become maybe okay not to breathe. It became so difficult that, and I don't want to get into, hippy dippy weird spiritual stuff, but there was an overwhelming feeling that either choice is okay. You can breathe and try to struggle through this, or you could not breathe, and whatever the consequence of that is, but either way is going to be just fine. And then, thoughts of my sons and, okay, you have to try to breathe. You give it one more good shot. And then, you push out a little guttural, grunt that comes out, and recaptured some breath. And then that went on for quite a while. That was probably 10 or 15 minutes. And now I was in sportsman class, so of course that would be the last class to take off along with the quads before then, when the trucks were a couple hours behind. And I remember early at the driver's meeting, one thing that, Sal and some of the other folks said, man, whatever you do when you see helicopters, hold your line, get out of the way. You're probably not going to win the overall, so salvage what you have, get your finisher pin, but don't do anything stupid. And then it occurred to me, I think I'm off the main line, but what if somebody else is taking this line as an alternate route and they're looking to pick up a few seconds here? And I started feeling a very real sense of urgency. I need to get off the course. And I got up on all fours, and tremendous amount of pain. Now it hit. Now it started hitting, and kind of crawled over to a rock and boosted myself up onto a rock. And
pain gauge at that point, out of 10, where were you at?
It's so tough to say, because I fractured my back before when I was 16, motorcycle accident. I did it again. A long story, but on a dare to ride a bull. Not a great idea, but I had done it again then. So that was familiar. There was something about that familiar, but it was exponential. So I felt like, I probably got a vertebrae again, but maybe multiple. And then I remember just the chest. It just felt like an elephant sitting on your chest. And I remember my left leg hurt a whole lot, but that was a leg where I had, ruptured the bursa sac and broke the kneecap. But it hit to where almost a paralyzing pain. And you're kind of at that fulcrum point between, I really want to move, but my will might not overcome these injuries. But you just got to try. So you keep pushing. So I worked over, I kind of boosted myself. I crawled up and I sat on a rock, and I started trying to do the math. And that was in the days where you had, remember the wrist mounted Garmin's, and that's what you would use for your speed on the transitions. That was gone. I'm not sure where that went. And I remember looking at my bike, and the muffler, the Pro Circuit, was tucked back under the wheel, and the whole subframe was bent down, and the handlebars were tweaked, and it was in pretty rough shape. So I'm assuming it probably cartwheeled across the desert. And I remember thinking, that's how I get out of here, because if I am off the main line, I don't have a GPS tracker. I'm not sure how they're going to find me, or by the time they do, am I out of water? Or, what happens? I don't know, but kind of felt like you're solo, right? You're going to have to work through this on your own. So there were, I guess it depends. Again, I get all spiritual and crap, but if you're agnostic, or, if you're a God-fearing person, but make of it what you will. I was on that rock, and the bike was laying on its side, and there was a mountain range right by there. And now, significant neurological impact. So I readily admit I bumped my noggin really good. And I just looked up in the mountain and thinking, I could sure use some help right now with the bike, because I don't think I can stand it up. And almost as if walking out of the side of the mountain, a couple, I'm assuming locals, walk out of the mountain, but probably down the mountain, and come over and ask me, do you want us to pick the bike up? And I would be forever indebted. And they did. And then they tried to start the bike and they couldn't. So with the 650, of course, there's a starting procedure. You got to, decompression and purge it out and get it going. And as I was getting ready to start it, I remember calling it, I have probably 3 good kicks, maybe 4. And I had went through those 4, and ultimately on kick number 6, it started, and it was the sweetest sound. It was the heavens open and the angels sang.
Because, I mean, like, to be blunt, you have a choice at that point. Either if you're off course, nobody's going to find you. You sit there and die, right? Or you have to get going, at least get to a point where somebody can then help you. Like,
yes,
that's a critical pivot point of like, okay, and you were talking earlier, and it's fine to get spiritual. I think that it's important to talk about these things because these are the moments that define, your experience, because, I've been in some situations where, either knocked unconscious or what have you, and you feel that warm creeping in of like, oh, I'm just going to relax. I'm going to relax into this.
Bingo.
And it's like, no.
It's a warmth. Yeah. It is a warmth and a comfort, almost an emotional warmth and comfort. Yeah.
And it's scary to think about that because, it feels like it's easier to go that way than it is to fight. Right. And especially when you have, things that have compressed and stopped your breathing and your heart and stuff like that. So,
yeah. And I for sure don't judge folks who have been through that and maybe who didn't make it or something similar, maybe rock climbing and fall. Until you've been in it, it's so difficult to articulate what that feels like. But I'm not sure there's a wrong or right answer. Obviously, for those who love ones and are in your life, the right answer is you fight. But in the moment, it's different. Yeah. It's just there's a certain element of peace. Yep. And serenity to it. And there's a certain beauty to that too. There's a weird perverse beauty to that moment that you're in, but you do have to make a choice. And hopefully the choice now in retrospect was right for me, which was to just fight. You just have to fight through it. So they picked the bike up, got the bike running. And now I have, I'm listening to a lot of things on my head about all of the just the mantra that no matter what, you don't quit. You finish the race. I remember thinking, okay, I'm 120 so into this. I might be able to finish this. So you really start to go. You're in shock. Yeah, that's the fact of the matter. You're in shock. And I was trying to relate how this might. How I can benefit this and finish the race and then never do this ever again. And I actually took off for the first few miles in the direction of race traffic. And then I realized I probably was in one of those offshoots because the tracks, the pre-run from the previous few days, they started to kind of peter out. And I turned around and went back. And then when I was heading back, I probably only had maybe 10 miles or so race course miles to make it back up to the ridge on the wash. And I knew I could get out of opposing traffic because it's fairly narrow canyon in there, not like some of the other canyons that open up very wide. And I was riding back, and then worst fear, I just start hearing helicopters.
Right.
And I realized that this is a bad thing.
Right.
And I need to get out of here. So I rode, and riding through the sand was difficult, the swerving. And of course, with sand, the key is go faster, not slower. And I just couldn't. And the bike was mostly rideable. The handlebars were bent. The exhaust was rubbing on the rear tire, but it was passable. You could trail ride it back. And I got up onto that ridge and I started heading back. And as I was heading back, then I kind of took a break for a couple of minutes and thought, think about where you're at. You're out of water, so you're going to have to find water around here somewhere. Not sure where I'm out on fuel, but we'll figure that out. and where can you go to get reprieve? Where is safety at for you? And then I started thinking, I know for sure I need medical attention. I don't think I want it in Mexico at this point. It's gotten better since then, but it's spotty at best. And so I started writing back in I just got this goal in my mind. I need to get back to the condo where we're staying. So I started working my way in that direction, and then a number of things happened. One, I came to kind of an off-the-course pit, and I believe it was Riviera Racing that they had set up a little bit separate, and they had a little bit different fuel strategy, and that put them off the main line. And I stopped there, and I said, hey, listen, I need to get to my team to let them know that 257X is out. Riding, going to make it back to the condo, meet him there. That's where he's heading, and we'll assess and we'll go from there. So the fella there said, hey, man, you sure you want to ride on? And so he's looking at me, and, the visor's missing and the bike's beat up. But really the biggest thing is somehow in the tumbling of the bike in the wreck, I got tangled up, I think probably the rear tire, but the rear tire was spinning and probably running. I'm thinking maybe I was laying on it. I just don't know. But it had essentially wore a hole through my skin and down to, you could see the white of the ribs. And, it wasn't big, but it was small enough, and it was bleeding fairly significantly, but also kind of equally cauterized from the hot rubber. And he saw that, and he lifted up my shirt, and he said, hey, man, you really, really ought to sit here, and here, let's get you off the bike. And I had a singular, I had to get back to the condo. So I thanked him. He gave me water, which was great. So stuffed some waters down behind the number plate and headed off, and worked my way up to Portecitos Road, and then ran into a group of the nicest group of Canadian guys, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But they had a map, and they said, hey, where can we go? They were down there sport riding from Canada on motorcycles, some consumers, and he said, hey, where can we go? So I took the time to show him where he could probably intersect on the course, and it was nice to have a break from the torture of riding. And then I got up on Portecitos Road, and that was a different animal, because of course one side of that is race course and the other side is spectator traffic. And I jumped in with that, and that was nerve-wracking, because I couldn't really stop and pull over, and I had to keep going, but it was good. I made it back to the condo, and now at this time, I had made one other stop, and it was at a score checkpoint. And I got through Weatherman, I got messages to my team, or at least attempted to, that your rider's going back to the condo. And so I felt like I've done everything I can. I'll get back to the condo. But I know that they're quite a ways out. I might beat them back. Show up at the condo, and they're not there. Really started feeling bad. I think maybe your body, once you get to where there's a relative safety, the adrenaline starts to come down, you let loose a little bit. And I thought, this is a perfect time for a nap. So I laid down on the side. I tried to go up the 3 stories to get into the condo. We agreed as a team we would leave the key under the mat at the condo. The key wasn't there. Blame that on my brother. And I couldn't get in. So I came back down the stairs, laid out, and went to sleep. And I remember waking up, I don't know how much longer, but I vividly remember the shadows had moved. And there was a work crew next to us, and the work crew had come over, asked me if I need help. No, I don't need help. Everything's fine. Keep right on, keeping on. And then I went back into the kind of mode where I'm back in trouble again. Now I'm out of water again. I don't know where my pit crew is. I'm really starting to feel everything now. Now it's starting to catch up, and things that I didn't think were an issue or become problematic. And and I thought, okay, so what's the solution here? It was hot that day, so get out of the heat, get in the condo, and you're just going to have to scrub all this, the embedded rubber, all the other road rash you have. It's going to have to come out of you. So couldn't get into the condo, but right next door there was a condo being built. It was a 3-story condo, and inside had a spiral staircase. The day before, the owner was kind enough to give us a tour, so I knew that led up to the roof of the condo. So I made my way little by little up that spiral staircase. There was no railing on it. It was under construction. And when I got up on the roof, a lot of concrete dust. It's probably 50% done in terms of the building. And the rail, there was a shared rail between the roof, a viewing veranda, a deck that looked over the beautiful Sea of Cortez, and then the outside deck for our condo. And I put a leg over the railing, and as soon as I put the leg over the railing, and I later learned that when you've had a concussion, there's a few things looking at the horizon can cause you problems.
Yeah.
So you probably were aware of a number of those things, but I remember looking back and thinking, God, this is a God-given view. It's so beautiful. And then I remember waking up on the roof. Luckily, I had fallen back on the roof of the condo I came up, because on the other side there was a 3-story drop that went down to a little jacuzzi down there. And by now the chase crew had figured out where I was at, and they came back to the condo, and I heard my brother and I heard John and American Brian, and they're running through the condo and saying, Where's he at? Where's he at? And looking back now, luckily they had videotaped almost all of it. So I have those wonderful memories to share with the grandkids one day. But when I showed up to take the nap, I'm not quite sure what was going through my head, but it was a yard sale. My gear was just spread all over the street, all over the sidewalk. And I was back up on one knee, had my hands on the rail. I'm getting ready to come back over. And my brother and Brian's buddy, John, who had never been there before, little overwhelmed by the whole thing, he walked outside, and the concrete dust had covered my head when I fell. And when I fell, I cut my side of my head open, and there was a pool of blood. And this poor kid walks out, first time in Mexico. I'm white as a ghost. I got blood running down the side of my face, and I'm trying to crawl over the rail. So they got me inside the condo, took a shower, which was probably dumb, but again, you're just not thinking straight.
Yeah, you don't prioritize correctly when you're in that state.
you just don't. And then it was time to seek medical care. Some of the greatest advice that I had gotten before the race is from a longtime business mentor, and he said, who had traveled internationally extensively into shady places, and said, secure extradition insurance. Go get some insurance. So I did 2 weeks earlier, and we called the company and explained what was going on. And as we were going through the preliminary stages of getting local medical support, they were dispatching a jet to send down to Mexico to extradite me, which turned out to be ultimately a lifesaver. So I went to the local hospital, and it's weird. Maybe you found this where medical care is patchy. Some places it's surprisingly good, and other places it's appalling.
In Mexico in particular, it literally depends on who's at the hospital that day.
Okay.
Right. It's like unfortunately, I've been to a few of the hospitals throughout Baja, and there's been incidences where I'm like, okay, we got to leave the person that was being treated is going to die here if we don't leave. And then there's been other times where the service was, completely excellent. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's literally roulette.
Okay.
Know? And you can't, you can only count on them for basic, or I would only count on them for basic stabilization, and then get back to the United States. And and get everything handled there.
Okay. But that was our strategy. And hearing that, thank you. That sounds like probably what happened is I do know that the doctor on staff there was volunteering from the United States, but you're only as good as the tools you have. So he's somewhat limited.
And volume, right?
And absolutely.
So race day, I mean, they're meant to handle, in San Felipe, they're meant to handle a couple things a day.
Mm-hmm.
On race day, you could have, 10, 20, maybe even more incidences, and not just racers, but spectators, especially there because of Zoo Road.
Sure. Yeah. So he treated me, and they actually took me in and they did some x-rays, and then he had got called on a remote call. He had to go out, and I remember they were wheeling me in, and they said, listen, you have fractures in your back. You have a broken femur. You have a cracked sternum. You got a bunch of ribs broken. Your head's in a little rough shape. Really what we need to do is stabilize your back. I thought, hey, fine, right? Put me on a traction board, whatever you need to do, let's go. At this point, we didn't know if the jet was going to make it or not, but we were working with the insurance company to get that done, and they started wheeling me back into surgery. And I remember them saying, we're just going to stabilize your back. We'll just put a couple rods and some screws in your back and we'll stabilize it. I called out for my brother, and he came back, and luckily he was able to persuade them that wasn't the best course of action. So then they ran an ambulance over to the airport, and by then the helicopter had shown up. So from the point of impact of the rock, I'm probably at this point maybe 6 hours into it, 7 hours into it.
That's the other thing I don't think people can grasp is the amount of time that it takes to extract people. Right? Mm-hmm. This is you're not at a remote motocross park in America.
That's right.
You know what I mean? You're, in that area that you're at, you're 2 hours south of the border, right? Nearest hospital, San Diego, that has a level 2 trauma, capability. So we're lucky, actually. We're lucky that San Diego has such good health resources, and it's right on the border.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you're far from help. You're far from help.
You're kind of in trouble. Yeah.
So in that, it's like that, and there's been people who have died because of the time part of it, of Caselli, I'll bring up, good friend, champion, it was a punctured lung essentially that he died of, which isn't that big of an injury, but because of the amount of time that it took to get to him and get him out of there, it killed him,
Sure.
So it's dangerous.
It is.
Being that far out of, medical help doing something crazy it's dangerous.
Sure. Yeah. So they, the jet shows up, and they load me into the jet. And if I can back up a little bit, I need to give a thanks to American Brian as we're heading out of Mexico. Now, we've loaded up in the Suburban, and this is before we decide to seek medical attention and get x-rays. And we're going across the finish line, and there were a couple of the SCORE ambulances there. And we went over a speed bump. And I made mention, I said, that's the weirdest thing. It felt like there was gravel in my back. I felt like this gravelly grinding in my back. And he spoke up and he said, hey, there's ambulances there. Let's just stop. I know we need to get back to the U.S., but let's just stop and have them check it out. And looking back, that was probably a life-saving measure.
Sure.
So he diverts us to the hospital. So anyways, we get to the airstrip, and they load me up in a medical evacuation jet, and we're heading back. And as we're heading back, I knew that, from speaking to my brother, they're just not going to make it to La Jolla to Scripps before I get there. They're just not. I'm going to beat them back. And I was real concerned about mental acuity and being able to make medical decisions without having somebody else there to do that. So I refused painkillers. I refused any medication. And as we were flying back, they said, hey, listen, they said, your vitals are jumping around a little bit. Your heart rate is really irregular. And at some point, you might not have much say in this. So you're just going to have to trust us. And so I please don't administer anything I need to be. And then I remember it was maybe 40 minutes later or something. I remember landing, and it was a really different vibe than when I had gotten on the jet to when I'm getting off the jet. And what I found out later is as my vitals started getting crazy and my cardiovascular system started to fail and I started having arrhythmia, that ultimately I coded.
You died.
I did. I did. It sounds so dramatic. I hate to say it, but it's the truth, right?
That's the polite way of saying, oh, yeah, you coded, no big deal. You died.
Right.
Your heart stops when that's what a code is, right?
That's right, yeah.
And it's, obviously scary as hell, but like, luckily you had, that level of medical help around.
Thank God. Mm-hmm.
Because, at that point, man, again, it's like, both my parents are medical. I know enough just to be dangerous.
Okay.
And I've also seen some serious accidents, and it's scary as hell. It's scary as hell. And, but to your point, it's kind of like things are mellow in the transport, right? And you have like this pace where everything's going at, and you're kind of like, okay, usually in your head, you're like, I'm good, right? Like I got this. I got this. And then all of a sudden the intensity ratchets up and you can hear everything going on. Sometimes you can't see it or whatever, but all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, this isn't good.
It's so true. Before I lost consciousness, I remember the urgency, the voice, the movements, it's so clinical. There's no please, everything's just barking. And I remember that. And then I just kind of remember going dark. So, I wish I had some romanticized version of, come to the light and all that. It just wasn't like that.
Yeah.
I just remember going out and waking up. And then learning later, what had happened through the medical records, and speaking to the EMTs that were on the jet, and they kind of explained what happened. So, but then we got to Scripps La Jolla, and that was just a whole nother level of experience with just the deepest of respect for that group of professionals. And it's funny how the little things stick out in your mind. When they took me into the trauma center, They lay you on for all practical purposes, it's a steel table with a drain in the middle, which aren't good indicators.
No.
Those aren't, and they went to work and they started administering medication, and over a relatively short period of time, about an hour later, they had assessed what was going on. And so a bunch of people come in the room, and I'm probably telling you things with your parents being, so I apologize for any redundancy, but bunch of people come in the room and a bunch of things happen in a really short period of time, and then everybody kind of vacates, and you have somebody who's taking notes, and you have a primary doctor, and he's explaining what is going on. And I just, at that point, I almost had this sense of just so happy to be alive.
Sure.
Just almost this sense of relief.
And you're in America.
And you're in America, right? Yes.
You're alive. You're in America. You're in La Jolla at Scripps, which is one of the
best care,
in the world, right?
That's right. Yep. Yeah. Proximity to the military responsibilities they have. The practitioners come from all over the world to practice emergency medicine there. So in the best of hands. And, but it still felt like it was important to try to maintain a sense of humor to get through it. And, I remember making a joke to one of the doctors, and I just said, I really appreciate all the attention, the care you've given me. I don't have any money. I'm broke, which obviously was, just clowning around. And boy, he didn't miss a beat. And he had such a dry sense of humor. And he said, well, that's the least of your problems. He said, because you've lost one of your testicles in the accident.
and it was a joke, right?
It was a joke. But boy, he played it straight.
Right.
And I thought, oh no, I'm gonna be like Lance Armstrong in the Uniballer, and I'm in trouble. And then of course he let me know that it was joking, but it was good. That levity helped right? Helped along with stuff. And then they admitted me into the hospital. By that time, I'm 8.5 hours from point of impact. And then the chase crew showed up, and then my then wife and my children show up. I have 4 sons, and they showed up, and then we could start making medical decisions as a group. But I just, as I had that first night in the hospital, I remember thinking, I just don't want to be here. It just feels like this is not necessarily where people go to heal. It just feels like this is where people might go to heal, but you also go to not heal.
Sure.
So I needed out of there. And over the next 18 hours, I started watching nurse shifts, when they come on shift and when they don't. And I saw my window of opportunity. I had kind of coerce my way into taking a shower, getting out of bed, and out all the traction straps, and taking a shower, which caused the whole hullabaloo. But when I came back in, I was really, really applying pressure to get out of there. And one of the doctors came in, he said, look, there's a recovery center. And he said, it's 4 major accidents like this. And you're nowhere near being stabilized enough. But if you're insisting, we can't hold you here, but you need to go to this recovery center. So that's what my plans were, and we were going to do it during the shift when the second, third shift nurse comes in, and I remember explaining to the nurse. I said, "Hey, my wife is going to show up in the aforementioned Suburban that was clapped out at this point from doing 100 miles of whoops," and they laid the seats back, and I remember the nurse had asked my wife, saying, "Hey, do you know the address for the Intermediary Recovery Center, Rehabilitation Center?" And she goes, "No." And I said, I got it. No problem. It's in my backpack. We'll grab it. And when we got in the Suburban, we didn't go. We just went to some family's house in Dana Point and stayed the night. And then the next day I got up, and we had 2 different vehicles. My wife drove my kids back up to Bakersfield, and I drove the other vehicle back up to Bakersfield. And that was on a Tuesday. And then that night, I recalled thinking, there's a lesson in all of this. What's the lesson to all of this? But I also remember having a very, very real feeling that I'm either going to be in bed and doing rehab for the next 4, 5, 6 months, or I need to get back to work. So that's what I attempted to do. So I went to work for a couple hours every day, and then just kind of kept building, and got back to it. And that's where it really kind of kicked in. Up to that point, I had reasonable professional success, but all of the lessons about racing and watching the big name teams, the teams that treat it as a business more than just a passion, they're successfully able to integrate the two. It really just resonated with me, and it occurred to me that if you can be successful in business and you want to race, it'll follow. And if you can be successful racing in business, it'll follow. So I started to apply all the things that I had learned in that first race. And then we did subsequent races, and we got better and better and better. And then ultimately never got to the highest level, but it for sure that experience informed for me a couple things. One, the basic tenets and elements that are needed that off-road racing can teach the average Joe about how to be successful in whatever they choose. So that was the route that I embraced and leaned into in what I wanted to do. And success came from that. And I was incredibly thankful. I've been asked a few times, what would you do anything different? Well, obviously some things on the front end but really not much, because it was such a benefit to my life. There's so many great things that came out of my professional experience, my personal relationships, everything, that I'm just not sure. I'm not sure I'd do any of it different.
It's very funny how these experiences, especially in off-road racing, are transformative. Like, I see it as a promoter. It's very fulfilling to, see people start a race, and the nerves and the anxiety and, all the different things. And then, for them to cross that finish line and realizing what they just went through and what they accomplished, and, talk to them about that, like it's pretty cool. It's a pretty special thing. So I'm glad that you were able to, take that experience and realize what the value of it was. I have a couple questions. So like the moment you're in the hospital and you go through all this stuff and you're kind of like, you're almost solo at that point. You're like, all right, you're very laser focused on what's going on with you and everything. What did it feel like when your family showed up?
Oof. Embarrassing. I felt embarrassed, selfish, because you for sure, you see that look on your kid's face, and it's particularly, from the eyes and mouths of babes. They were relatively young. My youngest, Matthew, who can I give a quick plug?
Sure. Yeah.
He runs Roush Steel Co. And he has become very preeminent custom design and metal and steel work for custom high-end homes and also industrial buildings that are looking for an artistic element. And so he works in various mediums, and he really intertwines wood with steel, rock, and metalwork. And that's what he does, and a great writer in his own right. But seeing the look on his face, and I have two other sons that are doing their things back in Jeffersonville. My oldest son, he runs a company in Bakersfield, co-owner of an IT business in Bakersfield, and I see them taking those businesses and they're applying the same things that they learned about writing growing up. And I think this incident probably partially informed too, because I really wanted to show to them, you don't quit. And when I saw that look on their face about the uncertainty and the fear, it really hit me that I need to go back and finish this race at some point and close the loop for me, sure, but also close the loop for them to show that, you don't quit, you don't give up. And no matter how difficult it is, that it's super important to finish. And one of the things I just love so much about our sport is that you're shamed if you don't finish, right?
Sure.
It's one thing to not win, okay, but not finish, and even the biggest names of the sport carry that same spirit into it. And I just think that's a wonderful thing, because it's a life lesson to everybody around. And that is something that I just really felt like I needed to show them, is that you go back and you finish what you started. Yeah. Because that was a tough moment when they walked in.
Yeah. It's a reflective moment. I've heard it from, quite a few people of like, you're looking at your children and your wife, your family, and you're like, wow, like, this affects them too. I've got to get this. I got to get through this for them as well. So it's a heavy moment, and then that was leading me to my next question is, so did you go back?
Yeah. So the doctors had told me, they said, listen, you have 1 year, and whatever point your body rehabilitates in 1 year, that's as good as it's going to get. Not true. I went back. I knew I couldn't race a year later, but I went back for my first time really on a bike, because ultimately it was 5 broken bones in the vertebrae. It was a cracked sternum, which ironically was the most serious injury, because I had a tiny tear in the aortic trunk, which is where people bleed out. Yep. And I had a broken femur, so that led to a drain bag and a hose being sewn into your leg that you get to wear for 4 months. And and I had half a body cast that I wore that for 6 months with the turtle shell, and just on and on and on. So a year later, I went to go for a ride with some buddies, And as I was getting on the bike, I was so excited to be back out on the bike and enjoying that love and that passion. And I can remember my hands shaking so bad I could barely put the gloves on. I thought my blood sugar is fine. What's going on? And it's just, I think, psychosomatic. There's something deep rooted in when your body's saying, "Oh, I'm not doing this again."
Right.
This leads to nothing good. But I pushed through that, and a year later, I entered and I rode it solo, and I finished. And I'm embarrassed to tell you the time it was.
But you finished.
I finished, and I didn't time out. Right. Barely. But halfway into it, I had to slow down and really start navigating, and it was that finish ranks up there with any accomplishment that, aside from, your children's accomplishments. I think that ranks up there with anything else I've done. Yeah,
we have a saying that we coined, that respect is earned a mile at a time, right? And it's very true, and it's especially once you go through something like that, like it's really weird. Like I've been fortunate that I've spent a lot of time with guys who are, legends in our sport and culture. And a lot of them have had similar experiences, right? Like guys like Larry Rossler, Walker Evans, Rob McCackern. Like, it's really weird being on a ride with them, and that we're down there and they stop, and I'm like, "Why are we stopping here?" And Walker goes, "That's called Walker's Corner. I almost died there, and then I was stuck there for 2 nights or whatever, 2 days," and they tell you the story, and so it's this idea of like, everything's not going to go right. And it's a euphemism for life. But you have to push through it. And there's only one direction, that's forward. Right. And there's all these other little funny lessons that you learn where you're like, yeah, you could have, you should have, the decision tree that you make, good or bad or indifferent. The big one is, preparation. The more you pre-run, the more you prepare, the better your performance is going to be. All these different things that then can be applied to business, can be applied to life. Very true. If you're paying attention, there's a lot to be learned. And then too, like watching other people and being taught racecraft from other people. I was very fortunate to spend a lot of time with the McMillans, and, I was learning when I didn't even know that I was learning in a lot of cases. Right. But, and a lot of other teams, but it's an incredible experience you had. And I'm glad that, you reached out, because I think it's an important narrative, like about our culture, because our culture wasn't founded by, radically special people. I mean, if you really distill it down, off-road racing in its entirety was founded by World War II veterans that had come back and they were bored, and they're like, "Hey man, let's get on our motorcycles and let's ride to the tip of Baja," the Eakins brothers. And they did it, and everybody, the whole world saw it and went, "Wow, okay, that's possible. Like, can we do that? Let's go do that. Can we do it in cars? Like what, and this is before there was any way to get fuel or anything down there." And it just spawned this whole idea that created, long distance desert racing, and made the idea that you could travel hundreds of miles, thousands of miles across the desert, and actually make it, and it attracts a certain type of people. And that's one of the other things that I think is important and special about it is like, there's a lot of things you can do with your free time and your money and your friends. And this one's difficult, and dangerous, but that's part of the value of it.
It really is. And, you look at, there's a lot of folks who have taken those basic tenets of racing and turned it into success. The late, great Malcolm Smith is a great example Absolutely. Of that and what he did. And can I tell you a quick Malcolm Smith story?
Absolutely, please.
So it's just a story of humility and inspiration for me. He was, forgive me if any of the minor details are wrong, but he had, I believe, just taken on a new line of motorcycles for his dealership, and I think it was maybe Husky. And part of it is he was going to in large part ceremoniously ride the first 50 miles out of Ensenada. And he had entered into the sportsman class. And years later, after my accident, I was continuing to race from a hobbyist standpoint. And by luck of the draw, literally luck of the draw, then he had drawn the spot right in front of me.
Right.
And I remember as we're getting out, your total nerves and you're just amped up. And I remember media kind of gathering around him, more people, and I really didn't know who it was. He was geared up, and after he had kind of pushed everybody away and we're getting ready, the bikes are moving up to the start line, he came back and he introduced himself, and I was just kind of taken aback. Of course, you know who it is. And he said, listen, he said, I'm going to try really hard not to get in your way. Now, at this time, Malcolm's 70-ish, right? And I'm in my 30s, and it's a legend, and it's a hero, and it's somebody you grew up watching race. And it was just so humbling that he would say, hey, introduce himself, and then say, hey, I'll try not to get in your way. And if you're gonna pass, I'll hold my line, et cetera, et cetera. And I do just remember thinking to myself, there's no way, number one, I'm going to pass this man. And number two, if he were to bobble, there's 100 of us behind that's going to stop. And it was the first time I had learned the following lesson, which I've learned many times since, is that, you know, what happens with young, fast guys is they just become older, fast guys. And I remember we took off, and he ended up actually riding, I think maybe to race mile 110, but he just rode like the wind, and he had double my age, and he just made it look so effortless. And I finally got up into the dust, and he was lots of fuel stops and goggle changes. And it was just such a joy to be exposed to his nature and his demeanor. And then after the race, I had a chance to visit with him a little bit about his businesses. And that was one of the first times where I really made a connection that you went through something that you probably shouldn't have survived, and you did. And now what are you going to do with it? And it was a way that I was able to take you went through something so traumatic that everything from here on out is child's play.
Right.
And I applied that to my business world, and I was so fortunate. I went to work for the Nordstrom family and worked on a number of projects for them, and had great success with them. Was very thankful for that opportunity, and then went to work for a Fortune 200 company, and called Mitsui, and I worked for them and got to see the world. And anytime I would get in situations where, you know, it would be a little unnerving, or I would just go back thinking, you know, that was a moment where you were laying in the desert and you made a decision, and honor that decision and take full advantage of that. And all of it was relatively, you know, innocuous in comparison to what you went through. But then really when it tied all together through working for Mitsui and the Fortune 200 company, is I got to work with and around Roger Penske for a period of time. And I realized he had made a comment that when he, from the first year racing to up to current, that he had never lost money in a year racing. It was always a profitable endeavor. And it taught me a lot about mindset, and also about detail orientation. And he was giving us a tour of his motorsports museum in Scottsdale. And he broke aside and he made a comment to his sales manager there, and a very pleasant discussion back and forth, but we didn't hear it. And later I was visiting with her, and may I ask what Roger's issue was, because he had a kind of a sense of urgency about it. And she said, well, I broke one of Roger's golden rules, and that's that we don't want our customers to see our trash. Right. And he doesn't want trash cans visible in his showrooms and his shops. And I just remember thinking that level of detail is the type of things that help in racing, because, and I've, you know, heard some of the your podcast before, and it's so true. A dollar seal will bring millions of dollars of efforts to a grinding halt. Yeah. And devil and God's in the details, and they know that. So getting exposed to folks like that in motorsports throughout the years, and then converting that over to business, I am certain from an average man standpoint, I'm certain that moment is what allowed me to leverage that and build on that into a professional success. And it was such a gift. It was such a fortunate thing that I went through.
It's interesting because I think about it quite a bit. And one of the comparisons I make, I have a lot of military friends and family, and we live next to Pendleton. We grew up with, tons of military around us, and especially the people who have gone in and experienced war. Some of them that come back have this kind of operational mindset where nothing can defeat them, right? Like they're, they can look at a situation and be like, it's gonna be hard, it's gonna be stressful, but nobody's shooting at me, right? And off-road racing is much the same way. And in having those experiences, and you're like, wow, do you think this is difficult? Try extracting yourself, you know what I mean? Yeah. On a motorcycle with broken back and sternum and all this kind of stuff. So if I can do that, this is really not that big of a deal. And it's that old adage of like, did it kill you? No, it didn't. Right. and like, that's a distilled down version of it. But I think it's very true. I think you subject yourself to these challenges. And then when you go out into the regular world and you're like, everybody's freaking out about, some sort of business challenge, you're like, all right, this is a sequence of problems that we have to solve and get through them and move forward. And I think it makes you look at everything entirely different.
It does. As I was preparing for our chat today, I took all of the podcasts and I had it transcribed. I entered that into a number of different AI platforms, and I asked a simple question. Identify the 3 most prominent traits that the champions talk about that lend to their success. And it was really interesting to see that there is a very common theme. You take the top 15 or 20 people, and it's not terribly surprising, but it's reaffirming that those type of things. And I can only assume with Mad Media and what you're building and what you've built over the years, which has been fun to watch it pick up speed and size and scope, that those things apply. But it's resilience, it's dedication, it's being prepared at what you do, for sure. Passion.
Sure.
This is a passion sport that the best figure out how to monetize that as well. But it really is interesting to see that when the top teams really do well, of course, there's an element of joy. Of course, but there's also an element of relief.
Yeah,
you can see that there's a they're satisfied with their result, but also somewhat relieved. And I can only assume that's, and I guess that would be my question is, do you think that's tied to the sponsor pressures? Is it applied to their self? Is it that they not so much about wanting to win, but not wanting to lose?
I think that, I think that this sport and this culture is very special in the idea that our genetics are scientifically on a 2,000 year lag, right? So what do you think our ancestors were doing 2,000 years ago? They were going to war. They were conquering lands. They were, trying to survive. Like, we have this thing in our DNA that isn't going to be satisfied with sitting in front of a computer or driving down the highway. And once you discover that and you get that little, that little light or thing that gets turned on, then you start realizing really who you are and what you're capable of. And whether that's traditional sports or, MMA or off-road racing, it's a real thing. Off-road racing is unique because you get to share that with other people, like even your chase crew, right? You're creating a gang and you're going to war with your gang, and your gang is going to have a good, bad, wild, crazy experience, but regardless, they're going to have an experience. And what I've found is, as a leader, it's my responsibility to push people, right? And you're going to find out some of them don't make it. Some of them, get in those situations like you're talking about what you went through, and they're like, man, I'm never coming to San Felipe again. I'm never, I don't want to be a part of it. That's totally fine. But then there's another group of people who need it, right? To feel alive, right? And to continue to evolve as human beings, because I think that, we live in a society and a culture now where everything's pretty easy. You're not going to starve to death. You're not going to freeze. Nobody's assaulting you. There's all these things that we've created, in a way to have a beneficial society, right? But in many ways, that's dulled our senses, right? And I think off-road racing is one of those things that we can do as a group to, turn that back on and do it in a way that's constructive, right? So I think that everybody becomes addicted to it, and it's not just the racers. I see it all the time with chase crews and prep guys and all this kind of stuff, like how much they miss going to races and just being there and being a part of it. So, and that's why I love your story, is like somebody might listen to the story and go like, man, that dude is crazy. I would never do that. Another person would listen to this and be like, yes, I want to have adventures like that in my life so I can, have, layers to my life experience. Right. So, I think it's important to storytell, and so that people understand, like, you can do this. You can buy a motorcycle. Like, it was the kid from Australia who just did it and was like, just didn't even know what he was getting into, but he did it, right?
With bunch of, and the community pulled together to help him.
Yeah.
How heartwarming.
And that's the other thing that you're going to find in this culture is like, we just did a podcast that comes out on this upcoming Thursday at 2 with the Allen brothers. And they're like, dude, we had no idea what we were getting into. Pretty soon, we're at a race and we need a transmission. We're like, oh, we're screwed. And somebody goes, oh, I have a spare transmission. And they're like, okay, well, we don't have the money to pay you for it right now. And he's like, don't worry about it. He didn't know them, right? And he just gave them a $7,000 transmission, right? Like, you go out into the world and you try and ask somebody for, a tow, and they're not giving you a tow. The off-road community is like, what do you need? Right. It's like it's a distilled down, really the way that culture should operate.
It is. The day of my accident, I took off without a radio, and Chris Blaze was in the pits next to us, and he noticed that, and he insisted that I take one of his radios with me. And that was one of the things that allowed me to relay that I was getting back to the condo.
Yeah.
So you hear all kinds of things like that. Hey, I'm incredibly envious of where you are at with your company today, because studying technology and working for companies and advising on a number of different levels, I really think you're on the precipice of something special. The general understanding has always been the best racing occurs when you don't see it. It's not short course, not stadium. The extraordinary things that happen that just leave your jaw dropped happen when nobody sees it. Technology is changing that. So
yeah.
I think that what we're seeing with a lot of the larger name sponsors, very recognizable, holistically responsible in the consumer marketplace, I think is partially a reflection of efforts from promoters such as yourself and others. But also, I think we're really, really close to where we will finally cross that hurdle and get into where world-class coverage of an extraordinary sport, and it has the real potential to blow up. So whatever it's worth, I think you're at the right place at the right time.
I appreciate that, and I agree. It goes back to part of the conversation we had before this of, talking about Gymkhana, and part of the precipice for doing Gymkhana was that my brother and I had, been out filming rally, and we would, walk down these stages or hike down these stages for miles to find the right location to find the right shot. And, it's a really difficult sport to make look cool. Right. And so we brought our style of skateboard cinematography to motorsports with first filming rally and then off road. And
is that where the fish lens?
Yeah, that's where
comes from?
Yeah, because like in particular, when you're filming skateboarding from a distance, it doesn't look very good, right? So one of the best ways to really show what's going on with your feet and board and body position is using a wide angle lens that, a fisheye that we affectionately called the death lens, right? And so, but it transferred kinetic energy differently. It felt like you were there with the person, right? And we were very close to the skateboarders when we were shooting that stuff. And so we brought that style to motorsports. Typically prior to that, motorsports was filmed from a tower, and their goal was to get the maximum amount of coverage with one camera. And while that's great if you're doing coverage on a track, you're not getting any visceral response. You're not feeling the energy or seeing the speed. You're just kind of like watching a dot go around, right? Or watching a car go around. And so it's always this game, being a cinematographer, of how do we take the experience that we can see and feel and transfer that to everybody else. So we had seen all these incredible performances, like these little pieces of it, just seconds happen on rally stages. And it's just like mind blowing. And then cause you can feel it and smell it and hear it. And then you're trying to get that across on film, and it's dulled down. So we, part of the precipice for Gymkhana was condensing, what happens over an entire rally into one performance, right? And going like, okay, this is what we're talking about. Like, it's worth the 5-mile hike to go in there because you're going to see a little piece of this, right? And so essentially was a skate video with a car, right? But I agree with you about the technology and where we're at with the evolution of things, and really just kind of the timing of everything. And that's why we've pushed so hard and expanded and like literally used every resource we have to try and do more. I mean, that's part of what this podcast is like, I realized that being 52, that there's 3 decades of print media that never got transferred to digital because all those companies went out of business. So most of the kids now that are in their 20s and even their 30s don't know who all these people that built our culture were or understand it. And it's kind of like being a chef, right? And you're like, hey man, I only know how to cook, Mexican food. I don't know anything about French food or Italian food. We can't really be a chef if you can specialize in something, but you got to start with an understanding of the culinary world. And then you can decide at that point, like, what am I going to specialize in? If that's what you want to do. It's essentially the same idea. So, I'm excited about the future, and again, thank you for coming because it's a great story. And I think that it appeals to the everyman about what is the possibility that you can have this incredible life-changing experience, off-road racing, whether it's with us or whether it's with SCORE or whether it's with another organization. It doesn't really matter. Just, and the other thing I would say too is, even if you don't want to race, volunteer for a team.
Absolutely.
Drive a truck, carry fuel, water, whatever it is, just get involved because you're going to have a blast.
You bet. Yeah. That's such good advice. My girl April and her son, he's an autistic young man, but it's amazing how he has taken to that, the order format, the numbers, the colors, and just being exposed to it. And we're planning a trip down to Baja, and I can't wait to get them down and get them exposed to it because it's just something I've given up trying to describe it. How do you capture how special it really is? And I'm really appreciative that you provide this platform for a number of folks. I learn a lot listening from it. I'm sure others do. And I hope if there's somebody out there that's on the fence, that's, thinking about it, just go do it.
Do it.
Just go do it.
Yeah.
We're going to be, most of us will be on this planet working for 40 or 50 years. Carve a couple out and go have an adventure of a lifetime.
100%.
Yep.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank
That
you
was
so
awesome.
much. I appreciate it very much. Nice to meet you.
Likewise.